When you start studying legal, right, you get like just pushed in the past, like 200 years ago, right? It's like a time travel. But on the other side, you see all this technology happening around, and then you're like, I want to be part of that.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Executives, the show where we navigate the intricate world of executive leadership, exploring strategies, insights, and personal stories of successful professionals, shaping the global business landscape. I'm your host, Majid, and joining us today is Till. Till is a legal expert, CXO and co-founder of Your Crowd, blending law and technology to drive innovation. He is the group leader at Fraunhofer's HHI AI Accelerator, and a PhD candidate at Europa Universität Viadrina, where he focuses on legal analytics and justice system digitization. With experience across prestigious organizations, Till is reshaping the future of law and AI. So, let us welcome Till. Hallo und herzlich willkommen, Till.
Ja, vielen Dank für die Einladung. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored. I think you're the second lawyer who's joining the podcast.
Oh, nice.
That's a good sign.
Who was the first one?
We had Oliver Bussmann. He now works in Vietnam, and he's the general partner for Duane Morris. So it's like Duane Morris is very big. I learned that. But thank you so much. So I try to do justice by quickly explaining who you are in a few sentences, but would love to understand from yourself, because I don't know the whole journey that you had so far. Maybe tell us more about yourself. Who is Till?
I think now, I'm in the legal sector at the moment, but that was not clear from the whole beginning. Like originally I was thinking about going into the medical sector a bit more, so my journey when it started was not clear where it's going to end, probably as with most of the people, and was more a little coincidence that I ended up in the legal sector. But while I was doing legal studies, I just learned, okay, that's really what I want to do. And then when you start studying legal, right, you get like just pushed in the past, like 200 years ago, right? It's like a time travel. But on the other side, you see all this technology happening around, and then you're like, I want to be part of that. You know, I don't want to be one of these people who just get lost and maybe just don't be valuable anymore because technology just is a too big thing. I just want to be on the forefront. And that's when I started like trying to combine both of these. I think that's now where I am.
No, that's cool. I mean, when I was flying back to Berlin, I was sitting with a young lady. She was reading a book. I don't remember the name, but this book focuses on the dreams you had in your childhood. So how do you accomplish that? And then when I asked her, like, what is this book about? Because the title was very catchy. So I was asking her, hey, what's this book about? And she explained to me that this book focuses on the childhood dreams. And then I started questioning myself, what was the dream that I had in my childhood? But it's truly, like, when you think about it, sometimes you don't even remember. It took me a good time. Like, I had to literally sit down and think, what was my childhood dream, you know? Yep. Like, I mean, yes, now I became an engineer, did an MBA and so on, but it was like interesting, right? I mean, you're a lawyer, you're doing your PhD, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you already do the state exams before the PhD, correct?
Yeah, right. So the legal education is kind of twofold. You have the first part at university, which takes like 4 to 5 years, and it ends with the state exam, which kind of the state of Berlin just makes possible, right? So it's not the university, but the state who does this exam. And then you have 2 years of practical experience, which we call referendariat. It's kind of a bar exam, and there you work at courts with lawyers, in the administration, with prosecutors, different fields. And at the end, you have another exam, practical exam, which also entails the part from the first exam. So it's kind of the same thing with the state exam, but with the top on with regards to the practical experience. And that takes 7 years, like roundabout in total. Like, so 5 to 4 years at university, 2 years the practical experience. And then if you want, you can do a PhD. Some people also start it before the second state exam. But if you do law, you can always continue, right? You can do a master, you can try to become a professor, you can try to found a notary. It's always like a never-ending story. Yeah.
No, I know German, if you want to be a lawyer in Germany, it's much harder than most of the places because you have to give 2 state exams. That's the first difference, like I know.
Yeah. I think that's a unique thing in a way, and there are a lot of people like who say, the education in Germany is kind of the best. You know, it has never been challenged. There's no empirical studies about that. It's just they're so convinced about their legal education system. I'm not so sure that is the best. I think there's a lot of improvement.
I mean, improvement can be done everywhere, right? I mean, if you think, like I read in some book, or was it an article, that the day you believe you're perfect is the day your downfall begins.
Yeah.
Which is actually very true. Like if you look at ourselves as well, right? We are always looking on the hunt for education. And I mean, I have had people from my industry, like literally the same job titles like I had. And whenever I sat down with them, it was very, very interesting to see that how different we were. Even though we worked in the same country, similar industry, same job title, but still our experiences and the way we thought was very different because of how we were brought up and so on. That plays into the whole building up, right?
Yeah, totally true. But if you say kind of it stops where we think we're perfect, I think the legal education reached this because they think they're perfect, nothing has to be changed. I think it's the beginning of the downfall of the legal education, if you want to put it that way.
But I think legal systems are the same, right? The way I learned German was from in the fintech industry, thanks to my boss. Worked a lot with legal and so on. And in fintech, you need licenses and so on. So you would sit down with lawyers and also DPOs and etc. So they would basically tell me everything in German. And then I was remembering the German words. And then there are some German words I don't even know the English word in. So it's a little weird, but it is like that. But we are sitting here today normally for a serious discussion. But before the serious discussion, I do have a funny little question. Because you don't get like every day to ask a random question to a lawyer. So the question I have for you is, if you actually won the lottery tomorrow, let's say 10 million euros. Yeah. A million is not that much now. So, so if you won 10 million euros tomorrow, what would you do with the money?
Interesting question. Actually, I questioned myself the question here and then. What would I do? And I think for me, the question is, what can I do for the society? That's kind of the biggest thing that I want to achieve. I want to be like valuable for the society around me, supporting it. And I think at the moment there are like 3 sectors which need a lot of support. And one is kind of homelessness. You see it in Berlin. There's kind of a lot of, I think you have the feeling it's increasing even though there are no really empirical studies about how many homeless people you have. We kind of have a guess. The second thing is that we have a lot of inequality with regards to the social origin of people in Germany. So if you grow up in a family that has not so many financial resources, likely that you're having less success than other people with more financial resources. And the third thing is, I guess, migration and kind of supporting people in arriving in Germany, supporting them, learning German, etc. And I think if I would earn or get these 10 million, I would go in these 3 sectors. And then it's the question if I would focus on one of them. And maybe a focus in the beginning would be like children with a social, maybe a bit better social background than others to support them. I guess that's it.
That's a good approach. No, that would be good. I mean, sadly, it is. Things are becoming very expensive, especially after the COVID. Things became really expensive. Even people with jobs are really struggling now. I mean, the rents have skyrocketed, sadly. I mean, it's the electricity cost and everything is like so expensive now that people are literally, even people with like normal jobs are like struggling. And then, for example, like some days ago there was this strike as well, BVG, right? Yeah. I used to think they make good money, but then when I realized they actually don't make that much. I mean, then I don't blame them that they are doing strikes because they need to also live. Because if you're not even able to pay the rent, food, and the basic necessities. I mean, we live in Germany, so we are still privileged with a good health system. I mean, it's bureaucratic, of course. There's a lot of paperwork, but it's like, it is still good. I mean, you get complicated procedures done at like no cost. Yeah. Like I know people who had like really complex surgeries and the cost was like 200 euros. I have stayed in the hospital like for 15 days before, like during COVID. And my bill was, I think, 150 euros. And that was like, I was alone in the room and it was like a special room and so on. I was like, geez, if I stayed in any other country, if there was no insurance system or health system, I would be bankrupt probably. Yeah, probably. But now coming to the topic that we have today, the topic we have is transforming the legal landscape, innovation, analytics, and legal education. So I'm super curious because you work in law and I have sort of huge respect for lawyers Before, I used to run away from lawyers, not gonna lie. Before, whenever someone said, hey, you need to sit down with a lawyer, I would be a little bit scared. But then when I started working in fintech, I realized that the lawyers in the organization don't want to make my life hard. They just want to protect me and the other people working in the organization. So they are looking out for us at the end. Because I remember I was working for a client and I talked with the lawyer. The product manager did a good job. You're like, hey, let's build this feature and it would be super cool. And then she pitched it to the lawyer and the lawyer was like, no, do not even ask anyone to test it. And we were like, why? It's a cool feature. I mean, as a consumer or as a decision maker, I would happily use it. She's like, but are you willing to pay 20 million euros? We're like, why? Yeah, because it's a breach, basically. If you implement this, the way the data flows, it's not compliant. So you please do not do that. So that's why I was like, I then talked with the lady. She was like super cool. And she explained, she was like, Majid, we are not here to basically destroy your product or something. We actually want you to grow, but we want you to grow in a way which is scalable. Because if you end up getting sued, you will have problems, right? So why not build a product that's compliant? Then you are more stable, then everyone will like you. And if your product is very stable and very compliant and you have these certifications, people will trust you much quicker. And that is so true. Once we had the TOEFL and so on, the official certifications, it was so easy to sell. We didn't even need a sales pitch. It was just like 4 slides, like put the certifications there because people trusted us. We did the due diligence, we did the hard work,
Nice way of putting it.
Yeah. So let's start with first your crowd. Like what exactly is your crowd?
Yeah, so your crowd is a platform that supports especially lawyers or in the end every legal person in doing their legal research in a faster, more precise, cheaper and in the end stress-free way. Because at the moment a lot of legal professionals face the problem that they need to research like court documents or literature, and we have outdated databases that basically are based up in keyword search, and then they have this wall of text, they have to go through a lot of documents, and we were wondering, okay, how can we improve this process, right? So free them from the wall of text and just giving them precise answers and accumulating documents. And for example, we extract the legal argumentation from text, from court decisions, and then we show relations between the arguments. And with this, we can kind of measure how courts argue over time and where the difference is, and we can map it. And with this, we can also construct texts, and we can give also precise footnotes to this. Also, thanks to Fraunhofer technology that we can use here, patented software, we can ensure that if we use LLMs, they're not hallucinating, and that the answers that they're going to give are precise, accurate, and link to the documents that are relevant in relation to the answer. So for example, in the end, you can just put a question in our database, and then you're going to get a precise answer with footnotes to that, for example. Or you can ask, okay, what is kind of the argumentation with regards to this question? How many courts argue in this way and that way? What are the differences? Or you can create a text with that. That's it.
And it's only meant for lawyers, not like normal individuals like myself.
In the beginning, we do it like this because it's a difference in confronting a consumer or lawyer, because a lawyer is still an expert which can deal with the information. And in the beginning, as AI may do some mistakes, even though we can avoid hallucination in our case, we want to have these experts to counter check. And if we're sure enough that the answers are good and correct, then we can also go to the consumers.
No, that's cool, because like oftentimes, like as a consumer, right, and person who's not a lawyer, there are these questions that pop up, right? Small questions, for example, I'm privileged or I'm blessed to say that I have some friends who are lawyers, so I can just WhatsApp them, hey, can you tell me what's with this? So they immediately answer. And they're like simple things, like sometimes there's simple thing, like an annoying or like lets someone go, messes up the whole Kundigung for the termination letter or something. Those are simple things which can be easily answered, right? I mean, and then people are questioning, like I see so many people questioning in Facebook groups and so on, and people who are not lawyers are answering. I'm like, geez, no, I would not trust these guys, because one, the answers are wrong. Imagine I'm not a lawyer and I'm saying the answers are wrong, and I tested my model. I was like, maybe I am overthinking. Because I sat down with too many lawyers. Then I took like a screenshot of one of the messages, of course hid the name and picture, did Datenschutz, we take care about that. And I asked one of my friends, I was like, hey, can you tell me, because I feel this is wrong. So he was like, yes, this is wrong. you shouldn't do that, because if you do this, you will end up getting nothing for severance from your employer, because you're basically disagreeing with them and you are taking them to court for no reason. So it is they will win.
Yep.
It's very easy for them. So, and especially like the whole IT structure right now, you see how many layoffs happening everywhere, right? So it's like, so that's why I was like, nah. And then I've seen like people posting random questions about some things, like how can I do like Anmeldung and so on, like how can I accelerate my process to visa, for example. I mean, there's nothing you can do. So these are things which, even if you go to a lawyer, the lawyer will just say, yeah, there's nothing you can do. Like you just need to sit down and wait. But now you talked about a little bit about your crowd, right? So what was the reason? Like there has to be one, the spark like comes from one reason. Like what was that single reason that you were like, okay, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm done with this researching manually and stuff. So what was that single reason?
You mean I said before, when I started the legal education, right? It's kind of time traveling, 200 years in the past. You deal with very old cases and you're like, wow, really? That's it? Surrounding you, there's so much technology, so much happening. And I said, okay, I want to be at the forefront. And during the end of the studies, I met a friend. We were working in the same law firm. He's called Frederick Troller. He's also a co-founder of the startup. And he had the same feeling. It was like, okay, we need to go in this legal tech area. And he was a bit further than me. He was finishing his second state exam. I was finishing my first state exam. And then we sat together, right? And we're wondering, okay, in which sector can we go? Which is the best one? And parallel, I started my PhD with Stefan Breidenbach and Dirk Heckmann. And, you're looking for a PhD thesis, you're looking for topics. And then I realized, in Germany, there's not much court data made public. For example, only 1% of all court decisions are made public. And that's only one example, right? You don't have access to the piece of paper that lawyers send to the courts, the court briefs. You don't even know which judges work at which court, necessarily. This is also not made public everywhere. Yeah? You have to go in front of court and then they print out a piece of paper for you and then you can send it. And then I've seen, okay, but abroad it's different. You have a lot of access to legal data, and there are also other companies and also researchers who work with this, and they can do interesting stuff, They analyze the argumentation. They even try to predict court decisions, see which results might occur in future. And I was thinking, okay, man, that would be interesting to do it for Germany, right? Because then I've seen like our databases, like Back Online and Juris, and they feel like, okay, they've been coded in the early 2000s, haven't changed so far. And then you see these companies in the US, in China, Russia, basically everywhere. In India, it's kind of everywhere happening, but not in Germany, Austria, Switzerland. And you're like, okay, we need to change that. It's basically a clone market, but it was not this single point. It was more like a journey.
Interesting, because I didn't even know that you have to put this information public. I would feel that, for example, there's a case going on between a company and an individual. That's strictly the matter of the court, the company, and the person.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? Why would you make a court decision public? And there are basically three reasons, right? One reason is, of course, a judge is just a representative of the state. And the state in Germany is a representative democracy. So the power that he executes comes from us, basically, because we elect the parliament, and then the parliament elects ministers, and they elect judges, and so on. That's kind of, or in most cases, it's that way. So we have to ensure that we see what's happening with the power, right? And that's done by transparency. So that's one thing. Another thing is that, of course, judges, they rule about the law, right? And the law is transparent because you want to know how do I need to behave? What's a crime? What's not? And judges apply these laws to specific cases, and therefore they also create some kind of law, right? And if you don't know the court decisions, you don't know how to behave in a society, right? And the third thing is then, which is a mixture of these 2 points that I just mentioned, is as a society you also want to see what judges do, because then you can say, okay, maybe they're walking in the wrong direction. I don't want the law to be like this. And you can only decide that as a society and put counteractions in parliament and bring up new laws that then judges try to rule about, if you know what they're doing, right? Therefore, you need transparency. But you're still right. We have to countermeasure it with data protection, right? Because if I want to know what the law is, maybe I don't need to know that Majid was part of this case, right? It's not a necessary information in that case. So we erase this personal information. But it's different with companies, because especially if you have class action, for example, against Volkswagen in the Dieselgate, there's a massive public interest in knowing why VW or Volkswagen is doing what in front of court. So you would not need to erase Volkswagen from the court decisions. But yeah, these are the reasons why you should make court decisions public, but you have to erase some personal data. And fun fact, Germany is probably now going in the direction of making all court decisions public. There are rumors about like a law that kind of makes it mandatory for judges to make their law decisions public, which is also something which happened in France in 2016. Earlier, and they just reached their goal this year because it's a complicated process, right? So it took them like 8 years basically to go through this process, and Germany is going to start it next year, probably.
Yeah, it will take a few years before they do that, right? It's like you have to change the whole system, so it's going to be complicated. But now you have a degree in law, you became a lawyer, and you have a startup. I mean, you have a legal startup, but you still have a startup. Yeah. So how did your education actually help you in becoming a founder? Because, I mean, there has to be something, right? Or there was none.
Yeah, I think my education didn't help me at all, actually, with regards to that part. I mean, I know the law, so I know some part of the business product, right? But with regards to what do I need to look at, how do I produce a product, it's iterative and all these processes, how do you work together with people, how do you deal with employees and stuff? That's nothing that you learn at law school, so tax and stuff or like this, it's not happening there. And I was also wondering, why do I want this, right? So I think, and the decisive thing was really just I wanted to be part of the forefront of this development because I find it interesting. Like, it's also, I said it was coincidence that I studied law. When I was younger, I thought about studying medicine, or it was easy to catch my interest in stuff. I could have probably also studied biology or chemistry, and I would have loved it. Probably just go into it, and that's the same with then law and technology. But I think then this thing of becoming independent and an employer, it's probably because a lot of people in my family are like independent in that way. Some have like hairdress shops, it's my mother is like an art therapist, it's not like these big company things, but they're all doing like an independent thing, and maybe that's something which kind of unconsciously caught me.
But it still helped you, right, a little bit. I mean, for example, for people who don't know anything about how to register a company, they are struggling in the beginning. Like, when do we go to the notar, for example? So it did help.
Of course, these are things, right? And also, I mentioned Frederick Tholey, my co-founder, and then we were working in a law firm, and it was a notary where we worked, really? Nice. Right? And they were doing like, it was a boutique, so they were also doing like big M&A deals. So especially Frederick had a lot of knowledge already in like, what do you do? Like, how do you create the contracts and everything? But still, in the end, you need to go to the notary, even though you do all the work and pay for the notary, which is also kind of a bit of, what the fuck?
Now moving towards more like the legal reform part, right? So because you are trying to change essentially how things work within the legal sector, which is a very traditional system. So how do you, what do you see as the biggest opportunity to do the whole legal transformation? Because it is a transformation. Yeah. And how do you feel that your crowd would actually contribute towards this vision?
Yeah. I think the core goal is to make law a bit more transparent, because as you said, right, you ask your friends who are lawyers, like, how do I do this and that? And it would be best if you would know that, right? If you could like read the law yourself or something, have this literacy. Because laws are written in a complex way. Basically, laws are written for lawyers, basically from lawyers for lawyers, right? So it would kind of destroy the business model of lawyers if laws would be made differently. But it's not the reason why laws are like this, right? It's more like people are not educated to write nice laws which are written in a way that everyone can understand it. And I think that this legal tech industry can change that fundamentally, so that everything is a bit more smooth. right, and faster. In the beginning, it will be for the, as I said, for the experts, for the lawyers, that we support them to be faster, and that they can also, with this, offer their legal to a broader range of people, because most people don't go to lawyers. It's too expensive, right? So, and we kind of lower the costs and make it accessible for more people. And another thing is also, a lot of people will stop working, right? Because they get too old. Like, we have a huge pension problem in Germany. For example, if you look on the judges, like 60 to 80% of all judges in the eastern states of Berlin, like Sachsen, Sachsen-Anhalt, etc., they're not going to work after 2030. Right, and that's a huge number of people, and we have no idea how we shall get so many people in the system until then. And we also have the highest percentage of judges and prosecutors in relation to the number of people living in Germany, right, in whole Europe. But still, the system is very slow, which is kind of, so we have more judges and prosecutors than anyone else, but we're working slower. How is that possible, right? Also technology will help us here, like to keep up the courts. We can avoid that courts are going to be closed because there are not enough people working, because they're supplemented by technology. And we're going to broaden the service to more people, make it easier to understand, and therefore, greater access to justice. I guess that's it. And how we are going to support this, we are supporting lawyers to work faster, right? So they don't need to go through 100 documents to find out, okay, what's kind of the status quo with the courts in that area, but they get a precise answer, footnotes, even a text written, so they can just proofread the text. And then they can lower the costs. I don't know if they're going to do it. They can also say, client, I still work 3 hours, even though I just work 1 hour, and I'm going to bill 3 hours. But I think that's not going to happen, because most of the time lawyers work more and bill less, actually, because they know I work 20 hours, but I cannot bill 20 hours because nobody's going to pay it. So I'm only going to bill 8 hours. But then they're going to earn more money because they didn't work 20 hours anymore, but maybe only 10. Because we can erase the working time by 75% in the end. So that's,
That's actually true, because I remember I was part of a project. It was a M&A deal, and I was the product, doing the due diligence on the product part. I remember me and there were the lawyers and everyone, we worked the same hours. We were all sitting together. So, but when because they gave us sheet and we just filled it right there. So we gave it to them. Because it was very, very modern style. So we got paper A4 to fill, our time. And when I was collecting the sheet, I just saw the lawyer. I was like, huh? But you worked the same hours like us. You're since 7 in the morning with us. Why is less? Oh yeah, we can do that. I'm like, dude, if you were Accenture or PwC or someone consulting, you'd actually charge them 5 hours more or 10 hours more, He's like, no, in legal, in lawyers, he said the same thing. They don't charge you the same hours, because then it becomes extremely expensive.
I remember my old boss, in the end, he was always sitting there, okay, now we have this amount of hours, but what's the right number now? What can we really bill in the end and stuff? And it was more a rule of thumb than really calculated.
And also, when I was running my startup before in Düsseldorf, the guy who was writing the contracts, he said, look, the goal should be that you should get templates. So you don't need to come to me, because one, it's going to be ridiculously expensive for you, and two, it doesn't make sense for me to make a small change. So then he sat down with us. It was an intensive week, but we had 4 different contracts, and those 4 contracts could actually cater. I remember I only had to go to him twice, because I was not sure about something, because the client wanted something specific in the contract. So he just wrote me 1 sentence. He said, just put it in. And I was I asked him for a bill. He's like, it's okay. He said it took me 5 minutes, because he said normally it's very untraditional people asking for this, but that's very true what you've also mentioned. But now I would love to talk to you about your PhD, because you're doing PhD. What is your PhD about, actually? What is the research about?
Yeah. So as I said before, I started PhD around 2020, right? And I was wondering, okay, which topic am I interested in? And I thought, okay, there are a lot of legal data from the court system which are not made public, like court decisions, right? And then I saw, okay, but you can still do a lot of stuff with this if these core data would be available. And in my PhD, I'm looking at, okay, which data do we have? Can we kind of claim more data for example, go to court and say, hey, make all court decisions public. And if we have all this data, what can we actually do with it? And what should we do with it? Because, for example, in France, as said before, they made all court decisions public. But then in 2019, they enacted another law saying, okay, but it's illegal to analyze judge behavior. And it's a crime, basically, in France. You have to pay a fee, or you can get up to 5 years in prison if you analyze individual judge behavior in France, which is absolutely crazy. And the question is this like a legitimate boundary, like by European law or by German law? Or are there other boundaries, or what should we do? You know, because if Germany goes this way and say, okay, we make everything public, will also the judges in Germany then say, hey, but do not analyze us, right? Because it's too dangerous for our democracy. I don't know which reasons they may come up with. And I'm kind of trying to create a frame where everyone is happy, right? So I'm saying, okay, we should go in this direction. That's kind of what the PhD is about, especially with regards to analyzing judge behavior.
I mean, this is new for me, that it's illegal. I mean, also I mean, judges are human beings at the end of the day, right? So they will sometimes they might have emotional something, you know, like which leads to a decision making. I mean, I would be surprised if a judge has no emotion. They're probably like ChatGPT then, like Judge GPT. Yeah. You know, like they have no emotion. They're just taking decisions based on logic. I don't know. I've never sat down like thought about being a judge. You know, like taking a decision. But I'm a normal guy. I take decisions in an organization. You know, like strategic decisions. But my decisions always include some sort of emotional bit. You know, that's what makes me human, and that's what also helps us scale up, in my opinion, because then I know, okay, this is how the customer will come, this is how things will happen, right? But thinking about the lawyers, judges and lawyers as well, right? I mean, if you start evaluating, you can actually predict sort of what will the judge say, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting what you say, because a former judge, she's very famous, she's also an author, and she said, you know, judges need to be neutral, right? They should not be, like in theory, emotion should not play a role, but it is, right? We are humans. And she says a judge who is neutral and independent is independent if he or she knows that these emotions might affect him or her, and that he tries to reflect it and kind of then says, okay, but no, I'm focusing, right? And that's what a judge needs to do. But there are some studies who try to kind of track these emotions, right? For example, in the 80s, there were a lot of people who went to the courts and did interviews with courts, like qualitative analysis, and tried to say, okay, the days back, it was like kind of a big social movement in Germany that tried to figure out, is there like a social hierarchy between judges? Because normally they are richer, come from richer families, and in the end, then rich people just judge poor people, right? Is that the case? And they found out, no, it's not the case, actually. It's a bit more diverse. But that's things which happened in the 80s. And nowadays, it's more, you know, you don't do interviews, but you analyze a lot of data, right? But there are also problems, because you will never, ever have all the data necessary, right? There will always be loopholes. Even if you have a court decision, it's not everything which happened in this case is written down in the court decisions, you know. Maybe the judge had a bad day, yeah, maybe, but it's not written in the court decision, right? So you don't know. And there are also some studies which are just bullshit, really bullshit. For example, there's a clickbaiting study, really was quoted super often, which says if judges don't eat before, and if they're hungry before they judge a bit more harsh, right? So there's a judge, like an analysis from the United States, but it could not be redone, basically. So they could not redo the study, even though they tried. So you cannot say that. But a lot of newspapers like this, right? They say, okay, if judges are hungry, it makes sense, you know.
They're like, judges are hangry.
Yeah, right, that's it. So you also have to be very, very careful, right, in what you do. And that's also a rumor why France enacted this law, because it's not super clear from the reasoning of the law why they did it, like putting it as a crime to analyze judge behavior. Because there was a famous study in that time of a French professor, and he tried to analyze if there's kind of a discrimination happening in migration law with the judges, if they kind of disadvantage some people from some countries. And he came to the conclusion it's the case, but also his study could not be redone. And there were like mistakes in the methodology, but still the newspaper articles kind of that, okay, all judges are racist and stuff. And I think that judges are also afraid of this, that this might happen. That a lot of people, because also then legal people, we start doing this analysis and they're not trained in doing this, right? We're not social science researchers, right? And then a lot of bullshit might happen. And
I mean, that's why, like, whenever someone of my friends moves to Germany, they ask me, Majid, we have heard about these text systems, like we can file texts using that. I'm like, be my guest to use them. I rather rely on my tax consultant because I trust him more than these websites, I mean, I can do it with that website, but if I am stuck or if something goes wrong, I'm liable. But if my tax consultant does something wrong, normally he doesn't. I mean, I've never seen, because for them it's an easy, easy thing to do. And the funny thing is, it's also not expensive. Like if you do it with the system, it's maybe half the price, but then you're saying, I actually get a human being to do my taxes, and then they take care of everything. They ask you questions like, hey, can you tell us about this? Did you do home office or not? Things like that. So, but I have a really interesting question. Like in the court, right? I presume there is a lot of data going on, right? So judge is one element of the whole court system. Then there is the people, like the lawyers, the second system, and the culprit or the corporations or whoever it is involved with the case actually, right? The witnesses and so on. But there's a lot of data flowing, right? What do you think about if there was a system which actually helped the judge, like in evaluating everything? Because at times, I mean, I'm a human being, I forget stuff. I mean, I don't think so that the judges do, but I mean, I'm a human being, I would forget stuff. But I'm just thinking, if there was a system that actually processed the information, not a complicated LLM, but rather just like an assistant, like an interactive, a quick assistant to make sure that it gets everything. I mean, boardrooms are now using systems like that. I don't remember the company name, but what that does is it takes meetings, minute of the meetings, and it does a pretty good job. I mean, and it's a German startup, I don't remember the name, but they do a pretty good job, and they basically take down everything that's being discussed. I mean, and at the end of the day, you can create summaries, you can actually sit down and evaluate. Do you think something like this would also benefit the legal system?
Yeah, so first we need to digitalize these data, right? That's a problem, but it's going to happen until 2026, until 2030, right? So the whole course will be digital in Germany. And it's an interesting thing also in criminal cases. It's forbidden to do a protocol, for example. Or it's not forbidden, but it's not done like a word protocol. And it's also not filmed, So, and in a criminal case, it's very important what people say, witnesses and something. And their judges write everything down, So there's kind of this risk of maybe forgetting something. And I think it's helpful, and it's a discussion if we should film these courtrooms in criminal cases, for example. Not necessarily making it public, but then having it as a support for the judges. I think that's necessary because there is this risk, right, of just forgetting something, not writing something down. I think it's pretty obvious. And then if we have this data, right, then the next question is, okay, what do we do with it? And there's also a current discussion. For example, there's a program in Hanover, in Niedersachsen, which is called Maki. And they try to support the judges with LLMs to come to a conclusion. But they also see, they're experimenting with it, there's hallucination happening, right? So there are problems. So it's always the question then, if you get this support, will it just say, man, I have 100 cases which I have to deal with during the next 3 months. Okay, it's an easy thing. I just say, yes, it's as the LLM said it. That's correct. I'm not thinking over it. This kind of anchor effect that the LLM is nudging the judge. That's kind of a risk. And unless the LLMs are not stopped from hallucinating, I think the risk is a bit too high. But that's more a question of what the judges, how they are trained to work with it. I think it's possible to implement it, giving it as a sidekick, so to say, as a little assistant. That would be super, super useful, I guess. And a discussion which is linked to that is, for example, in civil cases, you can settle a case, right? You can say, hey, I don't want a court judgment. We say, you give me 1,000 euros and we're fine, right? And the idea is that the LLM provides such a settling contract. And then the judge can go to the parties and say, hey, this is an example how you could settle the case. And that could also fasten the process. I think that's a very helpful thing, but we need some time to implement these systems. And I think an interesting way of doing it is, law is built up. It's a bit like Lego and mathematics, right? You have some criteria which have to be fulfilled, and then you get result X, for example, you have a right to claim something if these 3 criteria are there. And you can build up that in a tree diagram, right? And then make a computer go from step to step and see, is that the case or not? And with LLMs, you can kind of connect this tree diagram to reality, right? The LLM can check, okay, does this photo show X? And if it shows X, this criteria is fulfilled. Okay, next step. And for example, if you have like criteria which are a bit more vague, like for example, can I trust the person or something? You know, this is not, you can say plus or minus, I need to weigh some criteria. An LLM can do it a bit, you know, and if you insert court decisions, for example, ruled about trust or something, then you get this legal criteria and then the LLM can work with it. Mm-hmm. And then you can get very narrow in really like automating law. But still you need a human because there are questions of weighing factors and an LLM might just weigh it differently and still they're hallucinating. So, but I think it's an interesting way to go in that direction, and it's already happening in courts that they're trying to do that. So
in IT, we always say that GPTs or AI can actually help you with a lot of things. Like, I mean, I do research and it accelerates my time massively. Yep. I mean, I believe it can be the same. I mean, the information needs to be accessed by only those who should access the information, of course. Maybe it should be like a limited, like a LLM that's only for the people who have access to that kind of data. Because I know, I saw an article, it was a startup in architecture. What they did was like they built their own, I wouldn't call it an LLM, but it was still a language model. But they built it on their historical data of 25 years, everything they fed it, and they're just using that information now to help them with the next projects, you know. Yep. And it's actually very good for them because they're super happy with the whole, the outputs and so on, which shows that you don't need huge amounts of data. Yep. For example, there is like someone stole something, and Germany has seen multiple cases about that. So it can be something that can be easily highlighted. This happened here, 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 and here, and this was the decision.
An interesting thing that you talk about is kind of called smart sentencing, right? That you see, okay, somebody committed a crime. What was kind of the pleading in the past? Does he go to prison, or is it just that he has to pay a fee? And the thing with criminal court decisions also that not all factors are written down, maybe, which led to this kind of, and then you can get a biased outcome. And there's a discussion about a system in the United States, it's called Compass, and it measures, you know, if a person commits a crime, and you say, okay, you're not going to prison, but if you do it once again, you go, right? Okay. And they calculate the risk, right? If a person is committing a crime again, to say if we should do that or not, right? Or if we should put him directly to prison. And they weigh like, I don't know, 300 factors and criteria. But there's also a discussion about bias in the system. But in fact, like a lot of people rely on this system. So there's always pros and...
I mean, at the end of the day, I think AI in general can definitely help. But there must always be human intervention to make sure that the system is also not biased. Because if you feed, for example, based on what you mentioned, like biased data, of course the decision will be biased because it only knows biased data, right? So I think that's why we still would need to be involved with the whole decision making. For example, maybe before a judge could take 5 cases, now they can take 20 because AI is able to help them accelerate the whole process, right? These are just numbers. I don't know how many decisions a judge makes a day. So please do not bash me for that I said that. But now talking more about, because you also worked in data protection, and Germany is pretty. I'm looking for the words. Particular about data protection, right? I mean, when I've worked in different industries, I have had people writing us letters that please remove my data, which was like they were a customer, they bought something from the shop, so we had to remove it. So as a lawyers normally are at the forefront of also privacy, right? So you, like, if someone is confused about how their data is being used, they normally go to a lawyer, like, to make sure that their data is not mishandled, misused, or, you know, sold. And that's one thing I also sometimes I like about Germany, that not anyone or any, you know, working person can just sell my data whatever they want. It's controlled, you know. It's not allowed that someone can sell my information and make money from it. But what do you think are the biggest challenges for legal tech companies, especially with increased analytics and AI applications?
I mean, what you say is right? Germany is very particular about it, but it's also true for the whole European Union, right? Because it's GDPR, it's for the whole European Union. But still in Europe, a lot of people say, at least I heard as rumors from people who work in the European constitutions, if the topic of data protection comes up in the regulation or in the regulative process, everyone says, yeah, Germany is going to take their one. They're going to, okay. And I think it's also because, we had two dictatorships in a very short period, the Third Reich and then the DDR. And they're like basically in the Third Reich, policemen just entered your flat, basically without any reason, looked for everything, collected all the data. And I think that's one of these background memories, but they get lost. And I think a lot of people at the moment in Germany are also a bit like pissed off this data protection topic. They think it's a bit taken too serious. And I think data protection is often seen as a hindrance. But if I really look at data protection, it's more an enabler, truly, but a lot of people interpret it in a wrong way. They interpret it too stiff, too narrow, but you can actually do a lot, even if GDPR applies. So with that in mind, coming then to the legal tech sector, I think if you work with lawyers, they especially careful about this. They want that you have the data on European servers, because we have this problem if data go to the United States, will the NSA track it or not, will they have access? And they also need compliance with regards to their clients, because they don't want that their data pop up in the internet in the end. So most of the case you also need ISO certification, but that's also data security thing most of the time. So data security is very, very important, but I think that's a pretty obvious thing, right? We don't want that hackers publish this very sensitive data about people. You can imagine that, for example, a person is bankrupt and has some law cases and doesn't want anybody to know that he or she is bankrupt. Like, okay, that's reasonable. But other than that, I think we don't really have a problem. So, for example, our platform is based up in the idea that people share data with us, because as I said, only 1% of court decisions are made public. So we also enhance the law firms to share their legal data with us. And 85% of lawyers say, no problem, right? Because most legal tech companies don't really work with a lot of personal data. There are some inside, but most of the time it's really just raw law, right? Which you analyze. So it's more about really keeping data safe when you work with them, just having them on European servers, ISO certification. But if you can ensure that, I think there are not lots of problems with regards to GDPR.
Interesting. So now, because AI is innovation, right? So AI also talks goes in the direction of innovating new stuff, like thinking of a new solution. For example, this DeepSeek, and they're trying to evolve all the time, right? So it's ChatGPT is also I remember the first version was it was good, but it was so bad. Like when I think about it now, like when I see it's able to create images, it's able to create a video now, for example. And how do you actually balance innovation in legal tech? Because it is still decisions that were taken about a company, a person, or something, right? So we need to there's a bit of ethic involved, right? So how do you balance innovation in a sector which is also highly, it is regulation, right? So it's not regulated, but it is regulation. Yeah. And then also thinking about the whole, because decisions impact people.
Yeah. So with regards to AI, we are now starting a compliance process, right, to be compliant with the AI Act in the European Union. But basically, I mean, the AI Act is I think it's not a very tough regulation. It just really wants you to write down what you do, why you do it, and be just very transparent to ensure that. But then you really know what you do, and then we have a basis to do decisions, right? But to have a concrete example, for example, we could also analyze judge behavior, right, with our data. But we decided not to do it in the beginning because we were thinking, okay, is it very that helpful in our legal sector? With regards to the other side, to the threats that it could pose to people, because it was not a thing before. Because if you see startups in the United States, for example, where they say, we can track judges, and then you see an advertisement, social media video, where you have a camera footage, following a judge, zooming at the judge and stuff. And if a judge would see a video like this in Germany, he would be threatened. You were what the fuck, right? Suddenly I'm kind of in the center of public opinion. I don't want that. And with that, in relation to what it really brings us, it's not worth it, right? So there we have an ethical point where we say, okay, we see in the beginning we see that judges may be afraid of that, and on the other side we can still analyze the court decisions without individualizing it to judges. That's still a thing. So to break it down, it's really like we have a map of what we do with AI, right? We make it very transparent, and then sometimes concrete cases like this pop up, and then we weigh it, right, in the concrete case. But most of the time, I would say we decide ourselves to go with the ethical way and maybe not do it, but maybe wait, do it a bit slower, work together with the people to take them with you. Because there's also a thing that I learned, which you don't learn at university if you work in a startup, right? You need to communicate a lot, right, with people to avoid that problems occur and stuff, have flat hierarchies. And the same is true if you work with clients, right? You should not oppose products on them that they don't understand, that they don't want, that they deem maybe a threat. And we should be ahead of this thinking and think, okay, what could they think could be a threat in the future? And try to avoid that.
Ethics is one part, and then educating, like legal education, is also a very critical part to your crowd's main goal, right? So how do you advocate, for example, legal education with your crowd, or how do you plan to do it?
Yeah. I mean, for us, it's also important that people can use our products, right? And we may introduce new stuff like statistics in law, like how often did a court rule in that case with which outcome. And people need to be able to understand that, understand the databases. So it's about data literature as well. That's something that we want to put in front. And also that people are flexible in using tools, right? We are a startup, we're developing a tool, and we want feedback. But lawyers, most of the time, they want that something works straight from the point. They don't wait. If there's a mistake, a failure, they don't use it anymore. They get tired. And that's also thinking that we want to change. Because if you're in law, for example, if you have a high court and that kind of erases the court decision of a lower court, it's a very harsh tone. They say, you did this mistake, that mistake. You don't have any clue about law, you lower court, you know. And this same thinking is happening in university. If you write an exam and it's corrected, the people have a very harsh tone. You know, they write, you did this wrong and that wrong. And because of this, lawyers are very perfectionistic, right? So they don't want to do any mistakes, and they don't want to be confronted with mistakes. And that's a problem if you do product development in a startup, because you're gonna make mistakes, right? So we want a bit more empathy on that part. There's also, which one needs to train, and which is kind of a core thing in legal education, that empathy is not a big part of legal education at the moment. Yeah, and beside your crowd, I also build up a society to change, an association to change the legal education in Germany. And in general, aside these concrete ideas related to your crowd, I think you need to be open in a way in which way the legal education should develop itself, because there are a lot of people involved in that. You know, we are federal state, we have 16 states, we have their own education systems in a way. Then we still have the federal state as such, who kind of gives a frame for the education system, and then you have the universities. And then you also have lawyers, judges, I don't know, the students, the professors, everyone wants to get involved. And if you say, okay, we're going to change it that way, you're going to lose 20% of them straight from the beginning. But you need all of them to kind of change this system fundamentally. So, yeah, you have to create an open process really to change the legal education in Germany. But if this process is happening, then we are happy to introduce our ideas from your crowd to try to make the legal education more empathic and to introduce data literacy.
And how do you envision the future of legal education to be?
Like for me, as I said, we have 2 state exams, right, which take up to 7 years. For me, that's too long. And also, we focus not on the abilities that people should get, but we focus on knowledge. Right? If you look, we have like laws describing what should a person learn during the legal studies, and it's just a long list of different sectors of law. But they don't ask, okay, should you be empathic? Should you have like the ability to talk to people or discuss problems? And I think we should focus more on the abilities and less on the knowledge, because there's too much knowledge in this education, and I think we could erase 90% of the knowledge from the legal education. It's a very old system. Very, very old system where you just learn a lot of stuff. I think you don't need that. And then it could be faster because you have less content and a bit more focused on the humans and what they could do in the end. I think these are 2 major changes that I would hope take part.
Because for me, when I think about legal education, right, I always see there's one part, the experts. So yes, there it's, I think, important, like to get them accelerated, because even if a state exam takes 7 years, 2025 is already here, right? So 7 years, that means 2 years there will be very few judges, like in the eastern part, right? Like you mentioned. So, but also I think it's also important for the normal people, like who are not lawyers, who have to understand like their fundamental rights, and how can they actually utilize the legal system, because a lot of my friends who are not from law but are normally employees in IT or something else have no clue about how like how can the law protect them, like for example, I told many of my friends, hey, get Rechtsschutzversicherung. It's something that you should have, right? I mean, it's not that expensive, and it actually helps you, right? So, and it's the first step, like if you want to stay away from paying hefty fees to a lawyer, it's the first easiest way you can get an insurance, because you never know when do you need an insurance, right? And they normally have a pool. For example, if sometimes I have question, I do speak German, but sometimes I cannot explain the situation in German, because there's a difference. I didn't grow up learning German. So you grew up with German. It's the same for me in Urdu. I grew up with Urdu. So if you had to learn the language, you would struggle. Basically, there are some things which are just easier to explain in the native tongue, right? So I think there's also the element that people need to get educated also.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because in schools we have this possibility to learn it in some states, like having legal education in school, but it's not happening in all the states. But yeah.
I didn't know that it's possible. I mean, in Berlin,
I don't know about. In Berlin it's happening, and in Bavaria, and I guess in Baden-Württemberg as well.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, I can imagine. Berlin.
Yeah, because I had the offer of maybe educating people in school, because of thinking doing it maybe as a side issue, because I like to teach people. But the problem is I'm not allowed to do it as a lawyer, fun fact. Because you need to have the ability to teach two things. And I'm only able to teach law, but I would need the ability to also teach math or something.
How do you get that? Like, maybe I should do research about that. How do you become a teacher? And you have also published like a lot of work, right? Like your PhD, and also you have like journals, conference papers, and so on. So can you share something like an insight or recommendations from your work, like what you think could actually be utilized by people? And we can also put the link to the paper into the description as well, so people can actually go and read it directly as well.
Yeah, I think a general thing, as I said, about like data protection is that people understand it's an enabler, and it depends how you interpret it and how you weigh certain things. Then you can do a lot of stuff. And I want to concretize this with an example. It's a piece of paper I wrote, but it's not publicly available at the moment. But maybe I can name a different one as well. But it was about a research project in Germany of different universities, and they built a product in the corona crisis, but it's also applicable for other stuff, because they gonna make a scan of your body with cameras and heat sensors, and they have like 30 factors that they kind of measure, and then they see if you have a virus or not, if you're sick or not. And for example, you enter like a shop, and before you're scanned, and then like a red light or a green light appears, and then you can enter the shop or not. That's kind of the idea of hindering to spread a virus. And I made the data protection and the data security analysis for this project. But in the end, it was pretty easy and straightforward, right? It was not a big problem, but you need to think through a bit, like to see, okay, are there dangers of happening with the personal data? But you can set up a system where this is possible, right? So there's actually not a single thing I can imagine, or there are things, but very narrow things that are not possible under GDPR, right? Like social scoring maybe, but anything else is very possible. You just have to think how to do it and how to implement it in a safe way. That's the thing that I would give away with a message. And maybe another thing is about if you post, it's another piece of paper I wrote about hate speech in social media, and if platforms are allowed to delete it or not, right? And I think an interesting thing is that people should know that they have a right to claim back that the deletion was illegal, and that there are also platforms that enforce their rights. For example, there's a company called User Rights, or an NGO, which was also founded by my PhD supervisor. And actually there's a great, people can say a lot in social media before it's deleted. I think that's also a thing that people may know, and I can also put a link to the article that people can read it. Yeah.
I mean, this is a very, like, I mean, the negative speech is sometimes, I mean, I go to a restaurant, right? And I see the reviews. Sometimes the reviews are always good. And the food, when I eat the food, I'm like, I wouldn't even give this food 1 star because it's so bad. And then I realize they get their reviews deleted, right? So the bad reviews, you can get them deleted from Google as well. And then I'm questioning, like, sometimes I've seen, like, influencers went behind a restaurant and they literally destroyed the restaurant. Like, you can see stories on TikTok where they just bashed the restaurant because the restaurant didn't give them free food. And then people who follow these influencers are like, you know what, this restaurant is like a not a good restaurant. So it's also, I feel it's like a very thin line. Like, when can it actually really be really used to a good, and when can it actually hurt someone? For example, like with the stories I saw, the restaurant was normal restaurant, you know. He ended up also suing, and then there was a case and so on. It was like, but there's a very thin line, right? So it becomes very complex, right? So that's also when I think, like, whenever I review restaurants, I'm thinking, if I give it a 1 star, it will probably get removed. So, you know, so I need to be honest to myself as well. Like, was it that bad? I mean, I want to let the people know, but I put it in words which doesn't hurt the reputation of the restaurant. Maybe the chef had a bad day. I mean, he's a human being also, right? After all, I mean, I've been to restaurants like one of my favorite Pakistani restaurants. I go there every month once, and I can tell you the name afterwards because this video is not sponsored by them. So, because, like, sometimes I go there, the food is okay. I mean, and sometimes, like last time I went on the weekend, the food was like exceptionally good. It was like on the level of the food at the restaurant I go to in Pakistan. Yep. So it was that good. So it's like a little bit hard, right? Like, I mean, I'm just giving my opinion as a normal consumer.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, you're allowed to do that, right? Basically, I think in your case, probably it was illegal that this thing was deleted. You could claim probably that it's there again. I think also it's not that easy actually for them to delete it, because for Google they have to prove something that you were never there or something, or that it's really not the case, because it's kind of it's your freedom of speech, right? And freedom of speech is also very broad in Germany. You can delete something if you really say something which is not true, which is a fact where you can really prove it's not true. But other than that, free speech is very broad, unless it's very like harassment. It's just the idea behind the free speech that you want to be unpolite and really say, hey, you're a piece of shit or something. Then okay, you can delete that. But these are the only 2 things, right? Piece of shit and you lie. These are the 2 things. But anything else, and that's very broad, is allowed, basically.
I mean, and there are people who are good with words, right? So you can make someone feel like shit by sugarcoating it in the nicest piece of shit words.
Yeah, and it's not enough to just say somebody you're a piece of shit. It really needs to be like, you know, I don't accept you as a human being, and I really just want you to feel bad, right? That's
okay.
Yeah. But I mean, this line has to be crossed, kind of.
Okay, yeah. I didn't know that. That's it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But now, because we're also coming more towards an end, so would love to understand, like, where do you see the whole legal tech industry heading, let's say, in the next 5 to 10 years from now?
So I think technology-wise, a great thing is, of course, generative AI and agents. So we're going to see that a lot of processes in law firms going to be automated, like from writing like briefs to setting up compliance system or anything else. And the other thing is we have a lot of legal tech companies. And interestingly enough, a lot of them survive by bootstrapping. Right? It's interesting, you can bootstrap very good in this sector. And some years back, I would have thought, okay, these companies may get bought by bigger companies. But now I would say these companies get integrated in bigger companies, because there are a lot of companies who do this marketplace solutions. For example, you have this Microsoft Office services for lawyers, kind of, this software. And then you can integrate another startup with their, for example, legal research part, as we do it. And I think this kind of consolidation is happening. So a lot of generative AI, a lot of agents, automizing processes included in software of bigger companies, not buying smaller startups, but just integrating them with an API. Yeah.
That's interesting, because I mean, when you think about it, I mean, whenever a startup founder starts, right, first goal, raise tons of money, or the second goal is oftentimes like get acquired. But I mean, it's very nice to see that it's easier to bootstrap, because generally speaking, if you bootstrap, then you're not giving away equity. You can take the decisions yourself. I mean, we are all human beings. There is a good chance that if you get an investor in, they will also make wrong decisions, right? Yeah. So it can be like that. But thank you so much for joining today, Till. This was actually a lot of fun and like different to say the least, because it was very informative for me as well personally, because I always learn, and like it's always good to talk to a lawyer. Just like you feel safe, right? So you feel good because you're sitting with a lawyer. You know, you don't like, no one can sue you then. But this was so much fun. But is there something that you would like to say as like a closing remark for our listeners?
Yeah, of course. Also, thank you very much for setting this up and taking me on this journey. And I'm also looking forward to hear the next episodes of what you're doing. And yeah, what I would say, maybe for people who want to be active in this field of law, maybe I think it's very important that you talk to customers very early, right? Talk to their pain points, see if you really tackle the pain points, and ask them very early if they want to spend money for that. And then you see if you're on right track or not. So prototype very fast. Ask them, are you going to pay 20 euros for that today, or 100 euros, whatever you want to charge? And unless this person is not saying yes, you're not on the right path. And do this very early, otherwise you're wasting your time. And I think that's probably the most common startup mistake, that people don't do that. And maybe that's kind of the last remark for people who want to be active in that area.
I mean, nicely said. And this doesn't apply to only legal. I think this applies to every single startup out there, right? So try to find your product market fit. But thank you so much again. So to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to The Executives this week. If you found this episode valuable or not so valuable, leave a comment. But don't just cross the line, that Till mentioned before. But if you want to connect with Till, or if you want to learn about your crowd, the links would be mentioned in the description. So connect with him. He's a super nice guy, and he has a cool mustache like me. So thank you so much again. This is your host, Majid, signing off.